Good evening. Welcome to this February 1st work session of the Maplewood Richmond Heights Board of Education. I'm going to call it to order at 6:32 p.m. May I please have an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Move. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. 2.0 consent agenda. May I have an approval for the temporary accountant consultant?
We'll just moving to approve the consent agenda.
The whole thing, okay.
Yep. Learning curve.
Did you make a motion, Katie?
We just move right through to the board communication portion with the approval of the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. 3.0 board communication, legislative update, bills to watch.
Thanks for this opportunity to speak briefly on our current legislative session. The folks are back to work in Jefferson City, which means public education is under attack. So just wanted to make sure that our community members are aware of a number of bills that have been filed, and some have momentum related to public education and our ability to do the essential work in communities that we do every day for children across our community and the state. Open enrollment continues to be pushed by individuals in the legislature, which would create a lot of challenge for existing public school districts with the ability of students to move freely from district to district. There are just complications with funding there, with ability to plan for staffing and buildings and things like that that are not being considered by the legislature. The voucher tax credit bill is concerning in increasing opportunities for public funds to pay for private and parochial school attendance. Things are already tight in public education, and now is really not the time to be diverting more money away from the work that is happening currently. And there are a number of other concerns with what non-public schools are using as accountability metrics and other things that just fall outside of the existing rigor of public education. Also of concern is the potential of phasing out of personal property tax. As our community well knows, we are funded in significant part, almost incomplete, in completeness by our personal property taxes. And so the phasing out of those would be a significant hit, and there does not seem to be any real discussion about what would replace that existing funding to ensure consistency of services and supports in our schools. And finally, the charter school conversation continues to happen in Jefferson City. Some efforts to expand charter schools to be allowable in St. Louis County, St. Charles County, and Columbia, Missouri, again, with no discussion with public educators in these communities. And while I acknowledge that charter schools exist, again, now is not the time to be spreading our resources even more thin as we transition away from pandemic support and know that there are budget deficits looming at the state level for things that are already promised to the citizens of Missouri. So those are all of concern currently. If our community members so desire, they can reach out to legislators about these issues. In support of public education, we would want to see all of these bills not move forward. And I would like the board to consider signing on with other St. Louis County districts in support of public education and encouraging our legislators to not move these bills forward. We were contacted by our Missouri School Board Association Region 7 advocacy rep this week asking us to sign on. And so just, again, making clear that we are doing work both in our community, but to protect public education more broadly in our state as well.
So Katie, I want to I won't go into the weeds too much, but I just want to point out a little bit more that, you know, open enrollment is not a one-to-one. And so I want people to understand it's not about not allowing people to choose where they go to school, but when people choose, it's not that each school district has the same funding and we could potentially lose funding. And like, there are a whole bunch of things that I don't think our community has been exposed to. And the same thing with the charter schools, that while charter schools definitely have their benefit, the public school district that the charter school is in ends up being sometimes accountable to what happens at the charter school in a weird way. And so I would encourage people to get more information if they're curious about this. And what does the rest of the board, I would very much so love to be a part of what the District 7 was recommending, and what would the rest of the board want to hear in order to decide about that?
Can I add, Rachel, that the other piece around the open enrollment is the transportation component. So you have to think about students, and we talk about inequities, and those families who have the ability to actually provide transportation. That is not included. That does not also include for students who are supported through special school district for St. Louis County districts in regards to transportation for those groups of students as well. The other piece around the voucher and tax credit bills is that the level of accountability is different. So while the charter schools have to submit plans, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education does not accredit them. They're accredited through their sponsors who support them. So just wanted to be clear about the expectations and the impact on the school district, so that that piece can also be considered as we share information with our community.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions? Thoughts about whether or not we want to join in with what? Katie, can you talk a little bit more about what that's going to look like if we were going to join?
Yeah,
Excuse me, the District 7.
At this point, I think, you know, and we have been participating for some time as part of the legislative advocacy collaborative of several school districts in St. Louis County. We've also been participating in the county-wide professional learning community. And so there are a number of spaces where the school districts across St. Louis County and their school boards have been joining together for professional development and to discuss issues of shared importance. So I believe that a number of our colleagues in other school districts are going to be have developed a letter of sharing our concern broadly on these pieces of legislation that can be shared with the shared signatures, of our boards. And I believe there's also some social media items being developed as well that we would be able to share that would include our logo, if we were okay with that. alongside other school districts' logos in support of public education and opposition to these bills.
Katie, I have a question. So
Yeah.
we in the city, like the problem is that those people that are advocating for us in Jefferson City are the minority.
Right.
Is there any way to reach out to those districts that
Mhm.
have the representatives that are kind of forwarding these bills, probably not listening to the actual educators in the area
Yeah,
about that, because that might be more impactful.
Yeah, it's a good point that for the most part, the individuals who are representing us, Maplewood and Richmond Heights communities in Jefferson City, are aligned with our thinking on this and have been playing defense against most of these bills. There are portions of St. Louis County that are represented by individuals who are pushing this forward. So I do think that the show of St. Louis County support can be a bit more impactful for some of those folks who may represent some of our further west districts. It is a good point. I do believe that the Missouri School Board Association, most of these things, if not all of these things, are on the legislative agenda for our association statewide, and that obviously is a tactic that is employed by engaging with our rural counterparts, who obviously also want the best for educating the children in their communities too, aren't always under the same sort of pressure from charter school expansion, but most of these, open enrollment vouchers and personal property tax would impact them in some similar ways. And it continues to be an interesting tactic of pitting city and urban school districts against our rural counterparts by these charter school expansion bills explicitly naming the urban communities only. So that, I believe, is a very intentional tactic to, try to continue to cause rifts between us when we all are working on the same issue of educating our children in the public schools. So that's that. I just, again, wanted to bring our community and our board's attention to that. And it sounds as though we can move forward with engaging on that shared advocacy effort.
Yes, thank you. All right, let's move forward to study items. First one, 4.01 building goals update, and the first person is going to be Dr. Loyette.
All right, good evening, everyone. Good evening, board. Good evening, Dr. Jameson, Dr. Ambers Phillips, Dr. McGee. I am thrilled to present to you this evening our data around the earliest learners, our ECC children. Our metaphor work is surrounded around this idea of school as studio. And I'm sorry, are the slides, should I be presenting the slides?
Abby gave you access to pull up so that way you can control the speed. While Dr. Loyette is loading her slides, just a reminder that the district level data was presented in January by Rachel Ward, and at the end of her presentation, she indicated building level data would be provided by building principals. That's what you're seeing today. As a reminder, MSIP 6 under leadership for the board requires the board to continuously monitor the implementation of the strategic plan as well as building plans, and to focus on the district's performance and growth. What you will find as you see these particular presentations, there is an intersection to our strategic plan. So for example, for our students, which talks about academic authentic learning experiences, our metaphor work would actually sit in that. So when you begin to hear strategies around the metaphors or problem-based or project-based learning, another example would be equitable learning experiences. That would be an example of multi-tiered systems of support. The order of presentations tonight will start with the ECC, which is the beginning bookend, and it will end with the high school, which is the ending bookend for our students' careers here in MRH. And I will hand it over to Dr. Loyette.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jameson. I'm setting my timer now, and I appreciate the grace as I pull up the slides. So we have here our Reggio-inspired learning approach at the ECC. We have a year-long focus this year as educator, as researcher that aligns to our district strategic plan. Our priority focus for our students around authentic learning. We continue to study and implement principles of the Reggio approach to leverage our school of studio metaphor as a tool to authentically engage all students in relevant project work through PD, meetings with our pedagogista, and access to Reggio materials. Additionally, we're also focusing on the district's strategic plan focus for students to be success ready. Educators are engaging students and identifying student groups and demonstrating on-track success across multiple measures by meeting or exceeding state standards, which you'll see tonight, along each child's developmental continuum through PLC collaboration, instructional coaching cycles, as well as the study of best practices in math. And then at the adult level, our focus this year for our people is the emphasis we're taking this year regarding equitable learning. Our educators are examining our personal biases this year through the study of culturally relevant pedagogy and courageous conversations to really develop experiences that are responsive to the needs of our diverse student body. This is being done both district-wide with our collaboration with Special School District, as well as at the building level at the ECC. This is an overall scale overview of our APR data for the ECC. We do not have points aligned to us regarding performance because we do not have the MAP test yet at our level. However, we do get points related to our kindergarten entry assessment. And last year we did receive, the past 2 years, 100%. We are on track again with our preschool to receive another 4 out of 4 points using our assessments. We do administer 3 assessments per year for our students. Specifically, we're focusing on those pre-K students, those children that will be going into kindergarten next year. And we are focusing on really tracking that data on where our students are. This kind of goes back to the last time I was with you for our preschool program evaluation. We want to really focus on literacy, numeracy, shapes, colors, and social emotional growth. We did not receive all of our points in attendance as we did not meet that track for this past year. This upcoming year, we are trying to reach that by May 2024. Our goal for the ECC is to have 90% of our students here, 92% of the time. As you can see on this next slide, we have students that are, we're currently at 86.68% for our MSIP 6. That is 90-90 data, proportional data. If you look at the top right of this slide, I do report out daily attendance. So our daily attendance does look higher than our proportional 86.68. So we are really trying to push that, getting to past that 90%. When you break down by demographics, our Black students as well as our multiracial students and not specified are the 3 that are under 90 at this time. And next I will show you what we're planning to do with that data. Some strengths is all ethnicities daily attendance are near 90%. However, we want our opportunities for growth is that our 2 subgroups of Black and multiracial increase, as well as increasing our overall MSIP 6 attendance. So some of the action items that we're taking is we do have an attendance team. We did go a while with not having an attendance secretary, so we had a lot of office people helping out to make sure we were tracking attendance correctly. We do now have an attendance and preschool secretary, so we're meeting bi-weekly to progress monitor students who are below 90. We have individual attendance plans, letters being sent out as well to help increase attendance, and we are continuously talking about barriers to access. We're discussing what that looks like for families getting their children to school. We know, especially at this age, our little ones are not responsible for getting themselves to school in any way, shape, or form. It is up to our parents. So it's partnering with our parents to figure out ways to get here and on time by that 7:30 time that our building opens. The next one is around our literacy goal. By 2024, each grade level will show at least 10% growth. They're listed there on where we were at the beginning of the year with our fall STAR assessments in literacy. And we are also wanting at least 1 year's growth from any students who are below the benchmark on being at or above grade level. Here is what we have as far as a breakdown amongst our STAR literacy fall to winter comparison. Some highlights to notice here include the fact that we have our kindergartners that are increased 14% in proficiency in the STAR early literacy. And we almost see what we call a right-sized triangle, if you will, with our kindergarten cohort coming through. They were children not as impacted by the pandemic. They were here for our full preschool experience. First grade is one of our areas of growth, as well as our second grade, where we are making growth, but we want to continue to make that growth. Broken down by ethnicity, what you see here is a continued improvement, but still an achievement gap here between our Black and Brown students and our white students. So although we are making progress, we are not making it as quickly in closing the gap as we would like. I'm supposed to do that on the next slide. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. And then our Hispanic students, there are some more things I want to dig into with that data with our Hispanic students not making the growth that we want, as well as this last slide of our students with disabilities. So if you look at where our students are that have disabilities, and I just shared this with an SSD data team meeting to celebrate the growth that we are making with our students with disabilities getting at or above benchmark. You can see that 18% growth there. I'm sorry, I'm trying to move the little Zoom screen so I can see everything I need to see. Here we go. And finally, we have our STAR reading scores. So once students master the STAR early lit, they are then able to take the STAR reading. So these are not all the same children you are seeing here, but these are the students that are advancing to be able to take our STAR reading into the first grade. So here you see our first grade students and followed by the second grade students. And this should be the last slide. And this is comparing our STAR reading to our base broken down by ethnicity. I apologize. And we do have some areas of concern here that I will go to next. And STAR reading also with our students with disabilities, making some growth, but STAR reading is our area of focus to continue to make more growth. So our strengths include that all grade levels are improving. They're at or above benchmark, but students with SSD services are making some bigger gains than we've seen in the past. Black students did make the most gains with 20% in STAR early literacy. However, we do not see that in STAR reading. And so we want to continue to close that gap between students of color and white students. Our action steps, the state has implemented that we begin to implement reading success plans for all students reading below grade level. Our MTSS team and interventionists have been working diligently to create these plans and what it needs to look like for each individual student. So we have currently around 54 reading success plans for students below grade level in reading. We want to strengthen our Tier 1 phonics with tight versus loose professional development and fidelity walkthroughs. That's our foundations curriculum that we adopted last year. We want to continue to provide PLC time to plan out units, progress monitor and PLC collaboratives, as well as having more data-driven observation feedback sessions to improve these outcomes. We are now in year 2 of letters training, and we will have all teachers be letters trained, which is the science of reading, by next school year. And then we also plan on studying why our Black students are not making as much gains in STAR reading as they do in STAR early literacy. This is a conversation that has been begun to have in both our equity committee work, as well as some of what we're diving into with resources that we're offering and making sure we have a window mirror curriculum where children are seeing themselves in the text that they read. Going on to math, by the end of this year, we'd also like to show 10% growth in math according to our STAR assessments and 1 year's growth for anyone below. Here you will see our fall. Wow, 30 seconds left. So I will continue to push through. We do want to see our star, our first grade and our second grade are improving, at meeting at or above benchmark. We're not to the 10% yet, but we are continuing to look at how that is broken down. So we did see 10% gains in a few of our ethnicities, as well as our students with disabilities improving in their math scores. And our strengths here would be all grade levels are improving. Students with SSD services are also making gains, but we want to continue to close this gap as well. Our action steps read similarly to our action steps with literacy. I will not read them all to you. We are focusing our assessment growth measure data that we use to tie our teacher evaluation system to data, is all focused around math, since that is an area of growth for us. We are also working on what small group instruction looks like in math, and how teachers can pull small groups for struggling students, and what best practices look like, as well as work with the teaching and learning team to eventually adopt curriculum that could strengthen our tier 1. And our last one I'm reporting out to you tonight is our discipline goal. By the end of the school year, we want our students to be able to demonstrate school-wide expectations. We had a large rollout thanks to Ms. Stansel and the MTSS team on what our school-wide expectations of engaged, caring, and community look like. And we want all students also teaching and reteaching those universals that we have not previously had the previous school year. And then we did adopt second step, and we would like all of our students to be on track. Our incidents for discipline as submitted to Power School, you can see definitely our first grade students have the highest number of incidents reported. And I will share with you our plan for that group of students. By ethnicity, we do have our white students have the most incidents, but proportionally, our Black and brown students still have more incidents than our white students. Our male students are being referred the most. And our universal behaviors, we're proud that they have been taught and implemented for all students and celebrated daily and monthly. Our second step curriculum has been implemented in all K2 classrooms and in preschool SEL weekly lessons. And all of our teachers are on track for having all lessons taught in the next couple of months. We want to strengthen our tier 2 and 3 interventions for students who are not meeting those expectations. And our next steps will be to teach second step and universals throughout the school year, administer a winter SRSS so we can see students who are showing internalizing and externalizing behaviors, who have improved based on our MTSS system, and who we still need to focus attention on, as well as finally identifying key areas of the buildings where behavior can continue to arise, and make sure we're focusing on areas like the hallway, the restroom, after recess, and places that we might have more referrals taking place.
I have a question for you. I know you mentioned culturally responsive teaching, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds with this. And if I am, please, just let me know. And then you talk about like a study for why our Black students are underperforming. I just want to know like what that kind of looks like in terms of the study that you would be conducting or whatever. What kinds of things are you looking for? Like what's that look like?
Yeah, thank you, Christy. That's a great question. So we have held over the last 3 years different optional book studies. This one is the one we are beginning the second semester. It's called Disrupting Anti-Blackness in Education. So it's a core group of people who choose to read the book that we kind of just look at what research is saying, and then what are we actually doing to do something about it at the ECC. We had a great presentation back in the fall by Dr. Macklin and Dr. Diggs with SSD that talked about this concept of the red folder. The red folder it's a little story about a boy that was given a red folder, and in the story, what ends up coming out with this story is that he was a Black boy that was just sent out of class, and the red folder was nothing. He was just being passed from person to person. And the adults in the school didn't do anything about this, disrupting this inequity for the Black boy. So we came back and talked about what are our red folders at the ECC, and what are some practices or things that may be othering children, and what can we do about it. So we are beginning that process, but always looking for more things more research and more ways we can disrupt it. Also through our DEI work with Dr. Ambrose Phillips, and looking at how do we make sure that all, not just all students are welcome, but all staff feel welcome in our building, and what that looks like so that we elevate all students. Right now for Black History Month, we're talking with our faculty about what that really looks like when a child may come to you and say, I don't feel comfortable talking about it as one of the only Black boys in the class. This is something that has happened. And we're working with our teachers to give them strategies on how to talk about that, how to say, this is why we are doing this. This is making sure that all children feel comfortable. So it's a journey, I would say, but it begins with our staff and their mindsets and getting comfortable talking about it by simply just opening up conversations. And that's some of what we're doing in faculty meetings.
Thank you.
Oh, I have a question, Dr. Litt. So I know that these test scores are just one snapshot of what's going on. And it could be that maybe these kids aren't testing well or something, but is there another objective way of looking at how they're actually performing? So that, because we only test twice a year. I mean, what are we doing in between then to sort of see what's what are the check-ins, I guess?
Yeah, thank you, Josh. So those check-ins are happening a lot in our PLC time. So we are doing, we're having data-driven dialogue weekly with our teachers, and they're bringing assessments that we give at the district level throughout our different units. So for example, in math, they are bringing their end of unit assessments around a particular standard, and we're progress monitoring, tracking which kids are getting it, which kids are not getting it, and what are we doing to pull a small math group for a kid that has not, or a few kids that have not yet mastered the standard, and how do we continue to spiral those standards throughout the different units so that they are getting it. So same thing with on the literacy side of things, we're giving assessments, looking over those assessments, and then sometimes even pulling what we call fluid groups with our interventionists, our specialists who are reading specialists, who are then pulling based on that data. These 3 children didn't get this part of the assessment. We're going to push in and give them additional support so that they can meet the standard. So I would say our district, through our district curriculum and the unit assessments, as well as formative assessments and checking for understanding that the teacher is doing daily throughout the week so that we can reflect upon it during PLC time.
Okay, and I guess my other question too, and this kind of flows throughout all of these presentations, is are we finding that there is a common theme for what the kids are struggling with, or is it just some people are struggling with, phonics, some kids are struggling with I don't know, with it like subtraction or something, or is it like one group is definitely, you can point to a problem where maybe there's something wrong with instruction, or is it just an individual problem for that population?
Yeah, great question also. So one of the areas definitely was foundational literacy and phonics. That's why we did a deep dive into best practices of the science of reading and adopted what we call Foundations is the name of the curriculum. So we are seeing gains within that piece with our phonics and what our students are learning. However, now some of what we're seeing is some great fluency, but we're now noticing some comprehension skills that need to be worked upon. And same with, I would say, math. We're really doing a lot of focus right now on K through 2 addition, like in making sure that we are multi-step addition and subtraction, and we're kind of tracking what that is as well. So I would say those are kind of the 2 themes, as well as making sure our curriculum aligns to those standards so that we can provide the best tier 1 core instruction.
I think Katie has had her hand up, so I want to make sure we get.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, Katie.
Yeah, hello. Appreciate the call outs of some of the individualization, like the 50 plus, literacy plans. That is a new to me intervention, and wondering how you are going to be monitoring progress towards those plans? It's great to have them, but who will be involved in those? Are those for classroom teachers? Are those for coaches? Are those for parents? And then I will ask my second question, and then I'll turn off my mic. But the discipline data looks familiar. This is not surprising that we have more boys, being referred to the office than girls. This looks very similar to a presentation that Dr. H presented to the board, several years ago. So I know that we have worked on this in that building before. And I'm wondering, as we talk about tier 1 supports for kids, and then tier 2 and tier 3 supports, I'm also wondering what sort of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supports we may be providing for adults in the building. I suspect that those 61 incidents are from a few children and potentially from a few referring adults. And so just again, as the instructional lead of that building and the culture lead of the building, how are you coaching your team on that?
Okay, remember the second question, but not the first. I'm kidding. I can do both. The reading success plans, thanks to the teaching and learning team, we had a pretty comprehensive support plan for the reading success plan. So for weeks, we were gathering data, and our reading specialists were even reassessing children to make sure that the students that were qualifying were in fact the correct students. So there's been a pretty comprehensive plan on shifting our schedules to provide tier 2 and 3 support. So the onus is both on the classroom teacher to provide tier 2 instruction to those children in the classrooms, as well as then if they do qualify for having additional intervention, we're providing that as well. I would say that the other thing I want to say is that we met with every single teacher who has children on reading success plans, talked through each child. Things are being uploaded onto EduClimber for progress monitoring of the children. And then there are people responsible for progress monitoring the classroom teacher, what their responsibilities are, as well as how we are going to support as well with other specialists and interventionists. So it's a pretty well laid out plan that I'm excited to be able to pass along to Ms. Elam then, as she also has reading success plans in her building, and it'll all be documented now in EduClimber, which is great to see progress monitoring of how the children are doing in their areas of deficit regarding reading. So it's a heavy load, and it's a big expectation that the state is handing to us, but a very important one, I feel also, and knowing that we are already doing the work, but we need to make sure we're being very strategic on making sure tier 1 is very solid, so that all students are getting that instruction through foundations and other parts of our curriculum, so that we can intervene in small group instruction in the classroom, then seeing if they need any additional supports. It has shifted some of the way we have provided intervention than we have in the past. We are supporting in different ways, which sometimes feels like a stretch, or there were more kids getting pulled out for reading intervention before. Now it feels like there's more happening and expecting in the classroom, but we want to support our teachers along the way. And we now have a teaching and learning coach this year, and she is supporting that work alongside of our interventionists, our specialists, and our teachers. Your second question was related to discipline, and one thing that I have tracked in our discipline over these past 3 years is we no longer have the same, our incidents are really based on students and their needs, not so much by a teacher who is referring more than another teacher down the hallway. So I feel like because of the MTSS process and our focus on social emotional and school-wide expectations, that is being pretty clearly spelled out for all children in our school building. Then when they are not meeting those expectations, there's reteaching happening in the classroom. If they still need it, then it comes to our team and our social emotional teacher to really then intervene as well, and also kind of talk through with the teacher best strategies to keep our children in class. The number one thing is we want our students in class and learning, and we are building a great system to do so. I would say another great thing that wasn't highlighted here was our number of first grade students that were referred. Most of those referrals, which was not shown on here, happened in September and October. If I were to pull a monthly snapshot now of what our referrals look like, it would look much different, because not only did students receive MTSS support for those behaviors, but some students have even graduated now out of needing any support at all. So when the system is working in the right way and we're doing tier 1 and everyone is getting the same expectations presented to them, we know not all students will follow it the first time, but we have good systems in place so that now the students that have been referred are getting the supports and now are not being referred as much anymore.
This is just the first of our 4 presentations, so maybe we should
Move it. I
save
was going to say,
additional questions for email to Dr. Loyette.
I think that sounds like a good plan. Thank you so much, Dr. Loyette. If
Thank
people
you
have
everyone for your time.
further questions or concerns, we can handle them after this. I believe the next person is Mrs. Elam in the elementary school.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Ms. Elam, can you, oh, there you go.
I just want to share this one screen. All right. Good evening, Board of Education, Central Office staff members, and the MRH school community. My name is Carlisha Elam. I am the proud principal of MRH Elementary School, and I am excited to be able to present our data for our goals this year. The next 2 slides will be our APR overview from this year. Some of our highlights are our continuous improvement, which in elementary school, it is measured through our attendance. And we went from our 0 out of 4 points in 2022 to 2 out of 4 points in 2023. We also have academic achievement growth for all students in ELA. We went from average to above average. So we were really excited about those key things that were highlighted within our APR review. We also, one of our opportunities is a decrease in the academic achievement and growth in math for students of our student group. We went from 2022 from 5.5 out of 6 to 3.6 out of 6. So as we look at our APR data, we were able this summer, our building leadership team was able to collaborate and have a retreat in order to help create our academic goals. It's important for me to make sure that it's not just my goals, it's all of our goals. And so we work collaboratively with teachers who were content teachers as well as specialists who were able to look at all the different areas that we need to improve on and to set goals for our school. So for our building academic goals, all of our goals are by the conclusion of the 2023-2024 school year by making growth from last year's data to this year. So in the area of ELA, we want to move from 69% proficiency at or above grade level to 75% as collected by the STAR assessment. In the area of math, we want to move from 49% to 55% as measured by STAR assessment. And for science, we want to move from 49% to 55% as measured by our MAP assessment. Here, you will be able to look at our MAP data from last year and on our 2022 MAP data. three map data, every grade level was able to be over 54% at or above grade level for ELA, with last year's fourth graders leading the way with 66% at or above grade level. In the area of math, we have a larger difference. If you look, this one is easier to read. In the area of math, if you look at our, let me go back, sorry. In the area of math, we have a more significant difference between the grade levels, from 36% of last year's third graders to a whopping 61% of our last year's sixth graders, who are now seventh graders in the area of math. This is our star reading data from fall and winter of this school year. And we have, our proficiency has increased in 3 out of our 4 grade levels in the area of ELA and math. And we utilize, but I want to make sure that you all know that this is not our only form of data that we utilize. We also, during our PLC meeting time, and our teams are able to create SMART goals within PLC around the current practices and units that they are teaching. So they give pre-tests and then post-tests and mid-unit check-ins to see where our students are and are progressing towards the goals that they set within our PLC meetings. This is advanced, proficient, basic, and below basic in the area of reading. And the same for math. And this is for fall and winter of this year. So some of our strengths are that we do have designated time to collaborate during our PLCs. Our teachers really enjoy being able to have the opportunity to like unpack the standards and be able to look through things together. We also, teachers have been able to plan, having a designated time to have professional development to plan out their units, to prepare for any misconceptions that may come up, and making sure that they have an understanding of the units prior to providing instruction. Our Black, Hispanic, and multiracial ethnic groups had an increase in the number of students who were at or above the targeted growth. One thing, even though our building goals are around proficiency, we want to always continue to look at the growth of our students, and that's also through the unit assessments. I also wanted to highlight that in the third grade, those students with IEPs, they increased from at or above grade level from 21% to 55%. I was able to speak with one of our SPED teachers about what is happening in the space and what does she feel has contributed to the success of students within that area. And we really honed ourselves around the phonics instruction and helping students to understand the phonics of reading, and then being able to utilize that to help with the comprehension. We have done a great job this year of having monthly intervention team meetings, and being able to make mid-course corrections within our intervention team meetings. We realized that we were having so many that one day was not enough. So we have moved to 2 days in a month. And this meeting includes our admin team, our SEL team, interventionists that support whatever area a student is brought before the team, as well as our SPED team members to be able to analyze other interventions that could take place to help support our students. And then we do a check-in, we do a follow-up meeting to see if the strategies that we put in place were able to help. Some of our opportunities, our Black and Hispanic students are scoring significantly less. And we wanted to make sure that we're trying to unpack the reasoning why and what are the things that we can do in order to support them. We are providing identifying students who are not making growth and proficiency, and making sure that we are providing targeted classroom interventions for them, and providing PD for teachers to come up with instructional strategies that will work to help our students. We want to use academic monitoring. This would allow us to do in-person feedback on time with the teachers and administrators to see how are we collecting data while we're in the moment and teaching in order to inform our instruction and to be able to know before we get to the exit ticket what students may need and what questions that we may need to ask in order to support them. So some of our steps is continuing with PLCs, continuing to analyze data, providing PD, and allowing teachers to have unit planning and regular observations and feedback. This will be from the admin team as well as the coaches. Our attendance goal is to move from 83% to 90%. And we are well on target to increasing our attendance from last year to this year. If you look at last year, we were at 83%. Right now, we're at 89%. We are targeted to being on track to getting 3 points this year in comparison to 2 points last year. So we're very excited about that. Some of the things that we feel contributed to that is every week we provide communication to parents about our attendance. We have a slogan that's in our newsletter every week that talks about 90 for 90, striving together, every student, every day. And we know that if students are at school every day, we know that they are able to be in our care, they're able to learn, and they were able to continue to grow a sense of belonging. So in order to achieve and make sure that we are working towards our goal, we have an attendance task force. They meet every month. This includes administrative team, counseling team, our attendance secretary. We even have our MTSS coordinator who attends, as well as our data analyst for the district who supports us in this work. Within that time, we have check-in, check-out. So people who are checking in, checking out, our head custodian, some of our TAs, teachers who have signed up, they have calendars. Students are really excited about putting their smiley face to show that they are here every day. And this has been showing an increase. We have monthly attendance incentives for our classes, and classes get a trophy every week for first, second, and third prize of having the best attendance, as well as providing opportunities for the class with the best attendance for the month gets popcorn and a movie. And who doesn't want to come to school to be able to have that? We also, so some of our strengths is our attendance task force and all the work that we are putting in with that. Our attendance secretary is amazing, and she makes daily phone calls, and the students are really excited about winning. We had a 3-way tie the other week for 100% attendance, and we were really excited about that. We have increased by 6 points this year in comparison to last year. So some of our opportunities are still, how do we provide individualized incentives? If I come to school, how do I get an incentive for having 90%? Making sure that we are educating our school community on the importance of regular attendance and how that impacts student success. And a lot of our attendance is absenteeism is due to illness, social emotional needs, and family vacations. And so we're trying to come up with various strategies to utilize to help decrease the amount of absenteeism for those instances. So our climate goal is to decrease by 10% our at-risk students who have internalizing behaviors. I remember last year I was able to present and say that we had 70% of our students who were had internalizing behavior, that's shy, lack sense of belonging. And what we were trying to unpack is what is the why behind that. A lot of times you are able to see the externalizing behaviors, but the internalizing is a little harder to see. And so we were trying to come up with various strategies to support them. Also having a decrease by 10% for our discipline referrals. So within here, as measured from August to December, we have 62 to 18. That is due to, we have new system within Power School. And so that is what the data generated. Some of that is due to the relationships that are built within our teachers. We have seen students who are really excited about school. I remember there was a parent last week that told me that their kid was just so excited about coming back to school after the snow day. They actually weren't excited about the snow day. So that is something that makes us feel great. In our internalizing, we're seeing a huge number of our students in 4th grade that are having internalizing behaviors. We are really excited this school year that we were able to get a grant to have a social worker. We did not have a social worker at our school. So we have 2 part-time social workers who are a part of our SEL team now. We are continuing to do our second steps daily. We have had professional development on restorative practices and universals to utilize within the school. We also have, we want to be able to analyze the referrals and suspensions and SEL support that is being provided to see if it is working, as well as continuing with small group and individualized sessions with our SEL teacher, counselors, our SEL TA, social workers, as well as our therapists that we have from Youth in Need. Strengths. We have check-in, check-out up and running with our MU partnership for our Tier 2 students. We have had over 21 students served within our intervention team meetings. We are continuing professional development, and our 6th graders have a 15% decrease in the students who are at risk for internalizing behavior from last year. Some opportunities is providing early intervention. So we have these things in place, but they began more so in November. We would love to be able to begin that in August or September, just based off of the data that we have in the spring. And then 5% increase in students who are identified at risk from last year. And some of the opportunities are using our social workers. Some of the needs that we have are outside of pulling small groups. Some of that includes actually providing life needs, whether it is clothing or haircuts or basic functions as cleanliness or personal hygiene items. Are there any questions for me this evening?
I have a quick question, just more, I guess, a curiosity. Discipline referrals went way down, which I think is great. I'm just curious, are you seeing the same types of behavior from last year to this year?
I will say that I have seen a decrease in the amount of physical aggression from last year to this year. I'm not saying that it does not take place, but I do see a decrease. And I also think that that part goes along with the relationships that are built. I am finding that students really enjoy their teachers. They have gotten to know them. They have gotten to know myself and Mrs. Blair and our counseling team. So I think that part of it has to do with just the relationships that we're building within each learning space.
Thank you.
And just, the kind of the same question that I have for the ECC is that, these test scores, they're a snapshot of what's going on. And I know you said that there was, there were check-ins. How do these check-ins, like, are you comparing what the state standards are with what they're learning? Like, how does that work? Or like, what's it based on, I guess is my point.
Thank you, Josh. So what we have, we are utilizing we created our grading system, and they are aligned to standards. And so our teachers are teaching around the standards and being able to use the assessments that they are either creating within the system or that are already created as unit assessments to measure where students are growing. So they have a pre-test, and then they have check-ins within the unit in order to see if the students are progressing through a tracker. And so at the end, their summative assessment, they compare the data across the pre-test, the mid-checks, and the end of the unit assessment to see whether students are making progress. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm just trying to figure out, we look at just these twice-a-year tests, but I don't really feel like it gives us the whole picture of exactly what's going on there. It is disturbing, that we see this trend with, certain populations, and I just don't know what to do about it. That's kind of my frustration.
I think it really goes back to really when we are looking at data, how are we looking at who is getting it and who is not? And when we look at who is not getting it, then that comes about what are we going to do about it? Instead of just moving on and saying you don't get it. So if you don't get it, how can I be intentional about what a student needs in order to provide the support that they need? And that could even be like we have teachers who are incorporating student goal setting. And so students are setting their own goals. So then they're holding themselves accountable to what they say they're going to do. And that is a work that we are still progressing throughout the school, but we have started with a few teachers just to see what is the impact of students taking ownership of their learning.
And Josh, just to build the bridge, to go back to something that Ms. Elam said. So the STAR assessment is given 3 times a year. You're seeing the first 2. You'll see an additional set of data at the end of the year, which will inform whether or not she made the goals that were established. But a lot of that work that she's referencing around creating SMART goals in the PLCs, they progress monitor based on the standards and should be able to see if kids are progressing in the unit. So at the board level, you wouldn't necessarily see that, but you would see it at the back end when that 3rd assessment is completed.
I have a question.
jump.
Okay.
No,
Katie.
go ahead, Julie.
All right. Now, my question is, in looking at the data, there's tremendous growth in the 3rd grade, but it also looks like they may have come into 3rd grade a little less prepared, perhaps, than maybe they could have been. And I have a 3rd grader, and so I that was the data that I kind of focused in on. But what are we doing? I know you have goals specific for the elementary, and Loyette has goals specifically for the ECC, but how are we making sure that we keep that continuity and that we have that continuity between the buildings? Because it just really looks like there was a deficiency maybe of the 3rd graders coming in. I mean, yes, they caught on, but it looks like it was slow to start.
Thank you, Julie. One of the things that we have really been trying to do this year is to build the bridge from the ECC to the elementary to the middle, and the middle to the high. Today we were in a meeting and the ECC was asking me about the fly-up days and the middle school was asking me about the fly. And I was like, oh my God, it's 5 people and it's just me, but I'm that middle person that, brings it all together. And so with that, we have been talking about what is happening. An example in math. What is happening in the ECC and math? What are you guys noticing? This is what we're noticing. This is what we're noticing in the middle school. How can we have it fluid so that when students leave the ECC, they are ready for 3rd grade. When the students leave 6th grade, they are ready for 7th grade. And so the conversation is happening. We have done, I would say, a better job this year of collaborating as 4 principals. And so I am excited about where we're going with this because I am actually like with RSPs and we already have our MTSS meeting set up for our transition for 3rd grade, for 2nd grade to 3rd grade. And now the next for 6th grade to the middle school. And so we have already planned those dates so that we can have all the people at the table so that whatever a student needs, whether it's academic or something that is social emotional needs, we will already know prior to them coming to the school. But I think we're still working at making sure that we are like making it more fluid from building to building, because each building has its own personality.
I will add to that. So one of the things that I talked to Dr. Loyette about, Julie, is requesting the MAP scores for the 3rd graders she sent to the elementary school so that she can then share that data with teachers at the ECC, because the ECC students don't take MAP, but there is ownership as far as vertical articulation to ensure the students are ready. So that's part of the conversation that's being had so that our 2nd grade teachers can see where those gaps are and begin to tailor their instruction to ensure that those skills and concepts are being grasped.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, I'll just ask, given some of the significant, data disparities for our Black students in particular, I'm wondering, Ms. Elam, what your thoughts are about the potential for like internalized stigma for, for either our kids or our educators. I think it's, it's well documented that, in the age range of kids that you're working with, girls often decide that math is not for them. I certainly know that that's something that we're aware of. I am concerned that there could be a sense of our Black and brown students thinking that math is not for them based on some of the academic numbers here. And so just wondering if there are thoughts or discussions or potentially additional supports you think may be necessary if that is a concern that you share.
So I think that there are multiple levels to it. It could be unpacking the content and how it is presented, whether it be through the resources that we are utilizing. That is something that we are exploring, like thinking about, is that something that is impacting how students are showing proficiency in mathematics, as well as how does the math data and the social emotional data look in comparison to the students of color and the students who in math as well as in SEL. So are they having a sense of belonging, or do they have the relationships that they need in order to feel successful? And I feel like some of that, people work for people they like. And if I don't feel that, I belong here, then will I continue to, give my best or do my best? So that's what I say, but we are trying to look deeper into it because we are also analyzing the students who are pulled for small group math instruction and ELA instruction.
So I have a question kind of on the same topic with our Black and brown students. Have the school, I'm pretty sure you guys have, since you were saying sometimes the kids, because of social emotion, they don't feel like they belong and no telling what's going on at home. They probably don't have the resource they need, but have the schools or principals even think about like what outside groups outside of Maplewood that might have, that are African American, that can provide some of the support needed. For instance, Black Girls Who STEM. She has an awesome program. Her dad has shows that Black girls have really started getting into math, science, and everything. They have improved. So sometimes I'm a believer of this, that sometimes you have to go outside your source to another source to improve, to help your child to do better socially, emotionally, whatever it may be. So is that something you guys are looking into? What's out there that maybe our kids need that Maplewood cannot provide? And sometimes, to be honest, representation matters. Sometimes our Black and brown kids do better with people that look like them. They can understand, they can relate where they're coming from. I know the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce has really been getting involved in different schools because so many Hispanics are coming over. Same thing with the Afghanistan community, to really help uplift them and try to really support the schools so the students can improve and do better.
So with that, initially when I first came to MRH, and I'm going to be transparent, there are many partnerships that I previously had from different places. And when I asked, they said, you don't need me there. And I was like heartbroken because I was like, what do you mean I don't need you there? There's a perception that we are, what they provide is not needed for the students that we have. And so I got my feet wet, and I still went back to advocate for our students and try to see what all can we do in order to make sure that there are like, is there a way that I can have therapists or different people that could come in and have programming there? One of our TAs, she started a mentor program for our young ladies in 6th grade, and she has women of all different careers. And those young ladies really enjoy that. and I have seen them blossom and make a connection with her. But outside of that, we currently don't have that. But that was something that I did speak with one of our therapists about. How can you help me find more resources for our students so that all students can see themselves in different people and have whatever they need in order to be successful. I went to a training this week with Project Lead the Way, and I was really excited about it because potentially thinking about having that opportunity to expose that to all students. So not just the students that think they're smart or think that I'm good at science or math, will be able to experience it so that we can see all students find themselves in STEM fields. It's not just, boxed in and maybe they're not talking about me, but if this is something that is provided in the middle and high school, how can I provide it for all of our students in the elementary school, which would then impact their math and science scores? So I I am trying to come up with all of the things, and I'm open to any suggestions that you may have, anyone on this call or anybody in the community, just to make sure that we are providing all the opportunities we can for all of our students. We have to close the gap.
Thank you, Mrs. Elam, very much. And if we have continued questions or resources, we can pass those along. Let's keep moving forward. I believe our next presenter is Mr. Zitzer and the middle school.
Sorry, let me get this set up. All right, good evening. I'm Mr. Zitzer. I'm the principal at the middle school. I'm really excited to be here and be able to share some of the growth and the opportunities that we've had at the middle school this year thus far. So I want to begin with just looking at our APR overview from the previous year. So one highlight there in particular is for the first time in a couple of years, we were able to obtain some attendance points last year. So just made the cutoff. You need to get to 80% to achieve at least 2 points. And we were at 80.2% last year for proportional attendance. And so I think that's a real testament to the team. When I came in May, when I first got hired, I could see all of the attendance calendars we had up on the wall and all the kids coming in. So I know our team worked really hard to earn those 2 points for the first time in a few years. And so we're really proud of that. There was a dip though from the previous school year in our overall APR. We're down to about 40%. It's obviously not a highlight, but does represent a lot of work that we need to do. And I think that's reflective when we look at student achievement data. ELA is the one bright spot. ELA and science, sorry, are the bit of a bright spot there. But there's a lot of opportunities here where growth is the particular thing that we're struggling with at the middle school. Being able to bring in students and have them reflect a level of growth, whether it's in English or math, is something that we're currently struggling with, and our previous APR reflects the same thing. And so a lot of our goals and our metrics this year are about how are we talking about growth, how are we showing kids growth, how are we honoring growth? Because while proficiency is eventually our goal, like we have to build a mindset around growth with our students so that they're seeing that on a daily basis. Brief overview of our goals and data, and I really want to just get into what our action steps look like for the rest of this year. We built 2 goals academically to align with for our students' goals in the strategic plan. And so both of those are right there. They're essentially an increase of 20% reflective from our fall NWA data. And the way that we came up with that goal and working with our BLT was NWA breaks down data and student performance into 5 levels. And the one in the middle is nearing proficiency. And so on average, we're about 18.3% of our students sat in that approaching. And so our goal was really to be able to actualize that for kids, to be able to determine interventions, to be able to determine students to pinpoint, looking at that group and seeing if we can move at minimum that 20% of students over. What does that mean for our building? And so if you look at what our goals are set at, they're significantly higher than where we were performing last year. And so moving our way towards those goals should reflect in a positive increase for our APR, but also I just think better reflects what our kids are doing here and what they're capable of than maybe what our scores have previously said. Attendance goal is similar. We were at 80.2% last year, so the only way we can attain a third point, another point getting to 3 is to get to 85%. And so we set our goal there. And then we had some student climate culture survey data from last year, even though we've switched the survey over. These are the 5 areas that we saw low scores in. And so these are the 5 we've been pinpointing throughout the year and getting to that 3-point average, which is just an agree. And so if we can get our students to agree that all of these things are true, or at least on average are true, I think that reflects not only our student culture, but also on the academics and the improvement there. Just some quick highlights with our data from the winter NWA. We saw an increase in math of close to 2%. And then something I really want to highlight is an increase in reading of 8.4%. That's moving a significant number of our students, almost halfway to significantly further than almost to our goal, about 2% off our goal in that 4 to 5 month span of time, and moving kids into the proficient range, which is a really big testament to our students and to our teachers. This is our growth goal. So NWA gives us growth data about whether kids are meeting their growth targets or exceeding their growth targets. And so this data right here is reflective of looking at students who took a fall benchmark to their winter benchmark. And so if you're looking at the yellow, that's students who are about 1 point below their growth mark, at their growth mark, or above it. And so pretty much everyone from the yellow over to the blue are showing significant growth. And in the orange, it's just there's growth, but not as significant. And so we're seeing a large percentage of our students who are reflecting growth, and that is dramatically different than what we saw last year with at the same time with our benchmarks. This is just another way to look at our growth metrics and something that we're honoring and reflecting with kids and with teachers. You can see what the expected growth was. So NWEA determines a growth target for every student. And so on average, it was sitting there about 2.7 points. And on average, our students are exceeding that by almost a point each, if not over a point in math. And so we're seeing a large percentage of our students hitting their growth target. So while that may not totally reflect in proficiency, what we're trying to honor with students is the effort and the time they put in to testing and to taking the test seriously and taking their classroom assessment seriously. They're seeing that growth, and that's being reflected in what they're doing. This is the data that reflects our attendance. So the big thing here is that right now we're sitting at around 79% attendance, where students in that watch and on target group are very unlikely to miss our goal. The students can miss up to, around 17 days, and barring something dramatic, most of those students won't even approach that given their current trends. And so our real focus right now is that 40 students sitting in the high risk and action area and how we're moving forward with there. But we are on target to hit that 85%. We need about 25 of those 20 students to continue to be at school every day. And so I do feel like we're on trend, and the data does reflect that. You can see our hourly attendance there too is high at 95%. And then there's some data there reflecting the kind of interventions we're doing with students to ensure that we continue to hit those attendance goals. And those are also reflective of kind of carrying on what they did last year that allowed us to be successful in that area. And then lastly, here's the student culture data that we send out. We give this survey monthly, except for November, December, just because of the breaks. We decided just to do one. And so we've usually had a really high turnout for responses to the survey. The last month, I think we were a little over surveyed, and so we dipped a little bit in our responses, and I think that's also reflected in the data there. And so we're seeing some positive trends in terms of feeling like students belong, but there's still areas there where we need to improve. Strengths, again, highlighting growth. Seeing what our expected growth is, what our actual growth is on math and reading is incredible. And so seeing that over 70% of our students are growing at least 1 point. 1 point is obviously not enough, but it is reflective of that students are putting that effort and finding meaning in there. And that's a lot of what we did to build culture around like the meaningfulness and the important nature of our assessments and what that means for interventions and extensions for kids. Like, this data is real for us because we're going to use this to meet kids' needs, and we need to have an accurate representation of where they are. And so these numbers, when I compare them to last year's percent of students who are growing, are significantly higher. One big area of strength is that 8.4% increase in proficiency in reading. We're all really proud of the work that Ms. Kinkler and Mr. Smith and Ms. Pisani Rivera are doing to help our students increase their reading proficiency. And they've been working with the history teachers to ensure that that's also being reflected in those classes. And then staying on that topic of growth, we do have disparities between whether it's our white students and students of color, students with IEPs and students without, there are achievement gaps between the groups of students that are evident in what our data showed in APR and similar to what people have been speaking out about in the previous two presentations. But what we are seeing is that there's a shift in closing those gaps with growth. And so when we look at who has met their growth target, those gaps are significantly smaller, and I think that's worth celebrating. We've seen improvements in attendance, and I've kind of reflected that in my discussions already. So some areas of opportunity, again, our achievement gaps in math and reading are real, and they're reflective in our APR, and they have been for the past few years. And so working to continue to close those gaps is an opportunity. Our math achievement, reflective in general, is a focus for our building. Our math performance is now where it needs to be. And so one of those things is really looking at our curriculum at the tier 1 level and seeing what are we doing in terms of assessments that provide us incremental data, similar to what Josh has been asking us repeat in the previous two presentations. What are we doing to analyze that data and make quick real-time changes? And then what is our response to a lack of learning? So what does differentiation, academic monitoring, and small group instruction look like? Those are areas we've been focusing on and need to continue to bolster this year. And then with attendance, a lot of our attendance issues are around illness. And so we don't want kids to come to school if they're really ill. But I think with the shift to COVID protocols, it's really hard as a parent to determine when is it okay to send my student to school and when it's not. And so just a little further education and conversation around what that looks like now that we are not out of COVID by any means, but some of those restrictions are slightly different at this point. And then one of our student culture opportunities is just transparency with discipline. There's been a real gap with students and their reflections and talking to me about we don't know how discipline is handled. And so we know that discipline is happening. We know that there are expectations and consequences within our building, but we don't know how that reflects in situations, and we don't know how that data is what the incident data looks like. And it's hard to share out individual behavioral data because it's a violation of privacy, but we're trying to work with students to figure that out. It's still an opportunity for us to grow. Action steps related to our academic goals, advisory intervention. And so we've put in place 2 days a week specific interventions for students who are receiving specific math or ELA content from their teacher. So we've identified groups of students and they're working with those teachers on a clear set of standards and skills. And we're progress monitoring that every 2 weeks. We also have extension groups for writing and for Algebra 1 so that we can help students who, in the particular case of Algebra 1, students who maybe not have had an opportunity to be in that class, or maybe identity isn't reflected in that class normally. They have the support to be able to make that jump from 7th grade math to Algebra 1. We put in some incentive structures around our NWAE testing, but it mostly is not an opportunity to kind of show the significance of that and to reflect and celebrate growth. Professional development will begin in this next month around academic monitoring, specifically for us to figure out which students do and don't understand things and how we're making steps from there. And then shifting our intervention meetings to focus in on that particular group, the 26% of students who are receiving grade level support. I'm happy to talk about that more in the question section, but I want to be able to get to our last 2 action steps. And so our attendance, we're really narrowing in on those 40 students sitting in that high risk and action group and putting individual plans in place with those students and tiering them based on where the need is so that we know we can support them and encourage them to be here and reflect that their efforts through check and check out and incentives with them to ensure that they know that they're valued here and that we really want them here and that we're also here to support them because that isn't always their choice. And so we're trying to figure out what is the barrier to coming and how do we help. And then lastly, with our climate and culture, it's really working with my principal advisory board has been a huge help to helping us look at our student culture data. And then one of the bright spots or one of the spots that we need to focus on is how are we recognizing students for positive behavior that came out of our district climate and culture survey. And so that's an area where we're going to really bolster our student recognition programs through the rest of the year to hopefully see a change in that when we give that survey again. Questions?
Mr. Zitzer, as far as the climate and culture data is concerned, are you disaggregating that in any way? Do you have a sense of like what characteristics of kids are, maybe not feeling the belongingness or the way that we want kids to feel in school? And if so, what are you doing about it?
So that's a layer we're going to add on through February. So right now we had this set at anonymously and also wanted to limit the number of questions because we saw from our student advisory board that like the less questions, the more responses we're going to get. So we've been sitting around 190 responses with about 215 kids. But now that we're seeing kind of the same data along those lines, I do think we need more layers within that survey, even if it's a few quick identifying demographics to allow us to do that. So it is something that in talking with principal advisory board, I'm like, I think we're used to the 5 questions at this point. I think if we add 2 more, we're still gonna get the same turnout, but it's gonna provide us with some information that might allow us to do more targeted shifts in our practice instead of things that are whole group, either through our second step lessons or through advisory. So yes, we haven't added that yet, and it's been anonymous thus far, but I think we're going to add in February some identifying data so we can narrow in.
Mr. Zitzer, I have a question for you. You had said one of the areas of growth was in fairness in terms of like issuing discipline for behaviors. What are you doing to make sure that discipline is handed out equitably among all of the students?
So one thing we've really worked on is trying to establish from the classroom level is trying to establish and have teachers use clear expectations with them, because part of discipline is also who comes to our office. So before we even have conversations at an admin level with students, we need to ensure that we are providing that level of clear expectations and consistency. And so it's working with teachers at that level to ensure that it's a change in practice for us, but what does expectations and procedures look like in classrooms? What do those universals look like so that kids are given a fair opportunity to understand what the expectations are? And then do we have clear consequence hierarchies in our room so that there's a fullness of consistency with kids. And so then once they get to our office, Dr. Maxwell and I work together to ensure that we're communicating and norming the way we're providing discipline. And so we've seen a decrease. I think there was 177 incidents last year with referrals, and we're sitting at around 72 right now. So there's a decrease there. The conversations around fairness often are from the comments they provide are often around like they see a student who might get suspended and they don't know the length as to why they're being suspended for that length. And so a lot of the conversations with students are like, well, we don't get why some kids get 5 days or 4 days. And so it's been a struggle to communicate what that means without sharing personal reasons or personal identifying factors with kids. And so what we've tried to express and what came from students was that consequence hierarchy in class came from our students. They wanted to see a clear marker for what happens if we get redirected. When do we need to move our seat? And so we've been trying to do things like that from their advice to kind of make that clear. But from an admin level, Dr. Maxwell and I work together to norm how we're responding to consequences so that we can be restorative in our practices and not lean heavily on any sort of punitive measures.
I'll just also add to that question, Christy. We do have to revisit our student expectation code. It is very broad, which makes applying it consistently and equitably very difficult. You are able to create a student expectation code that's rooted in restorative practices. The hope is to begin that work next year.
Oh, and Mr. Zitzer, I know each building is their own and has their own challenges. I mean, me personally, I think that middle school is probably the worst time anybody's ever going to have in their entire life. So, good job for doing what you do. But I'm curious, as Ms. Elam was saying earlier about all of y'all working together to make those transitions. I was wondering what you were doing specifically to help those kids that were transitioning into high school.
Yeah, so our high school transition, I think, is a bit of a stronger transition for us. And that when we're speaking with students, they feel more prepared for the high school level. That's a perception from a student who hasn't been there yet, obviously, in groups of students, but having mirrored schedules to the high school, having mirrored expectations as far as Canvas and things like that. Like we've been able to align ourselves. And Ms. Huffman and I work together routinely and norm with each other routinely so that transition for kids seems more reasonable for them. I think one of the places that we really need to work on is what does the rigor look like for students as they come through our buildings. One of the hardest transitions at the middle school level is our sheer instructional time. So, reading instruction goes from about 600 minutes a week, or about 500 minutes a week to 200 minutes a week at the middle school. And so how are we using the time we have effectively to to provide students with all the supports they need to be able to transition better. And so making those advisory changes to provide intentional support, like we're just trying to make sure we have students prepared for the high school level while increasing the rigor at the same time. And so it's been a real measure in creativity with our minutes, because in order for them to be ready for high school, we need to ensure that we're doing a great at our tier 1 instruction with less time, and then also being able to provide those support. So it's really been a measure of like, how are we getting creative with our schedule to provide instructional supports for students. As far as the climate and culture parts, I think that being on the same page and working with the high school so that we don't have separate sets of expectations for Canvas, for passing periods, for things like that. Obviously, we do some things different, like cell phones and stuff, but that clear communication with the high school and trying to be in line that way with the high school, I think, is going to be a measure that helps students with that transition.
Thank you.
I just have a quick question on the opportunities. You have the achievement gaps that are in reading and math for students of color and students with IEPs. The data that you show is all aggregated. And so you'd mentioned most of them, 70% of your students had that 1 point growth. What growth, roughly did you see from those areas that makes you, identify that as the opportunity? Can you just speak to that just a little bit?
Yep. And so when we saw just in shifts from our fall to our winter benchmark, we saw about a 2.5% increase in math proficiency and about a 4% increase in reading proficiency for students of color. And so while that is beginning to close that gap, it's not doing enough. Where the thing I wanted to when we looked at, students meeting their growth target, we see that being from like 60% of white students hitting their reading growth target to 68% of white students hitting their growth target to 60% of students of color hitting it. And so like, that's why I kind of pinpoint this, like, it's a very obvious area that achievement gap exists. But what I'm seeing when I look at meeting growth targets is that gap is significantly closed, if not even. And in the case of 8th grade reading, it was flipped. More of our students of color are hitting their growth targets than our white students were. And so when I look at the grade level specifically, the gaps still exist achievement wise. They're different. They look different because our 7th grade achieves at a higher level currently than our 8th grade does. But yeah, the achievement gaps that have been represented at each other building exists here. It's the growth that I've seen is a much smaller gap, if not a gap at all.
And the students with IEPs, is that a similar trend you saw there?
So it was a similar trend with students with IEPs, free and reduced lunch, students of color, that the achievement gap on raw achievement scores exists. But when we look at who's meeting our growth targets, again, those gaps come down to 5 to 7%, if not there at all. And so that's something that while there's still so much room to grow, that's something I really want to be able to highlight, because looking at that first sheet of APR data, that's a really daunting thing to bring to our staff. And so we have a lot of work to do, and we can't minimize that at all. But seeing that growth kind of span close is encouraging.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zitzer. I appreciate it. And moving on to, last but not least, Mrs. Huffman and our high school.
Good evening, everyone. Give me a second here to get this presentation. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me this evening. I'm excited to share our progress so far this school year and kind of where we've started and where we are and where we're headed. So this is our presentation for MRH High School. This first slide is our APR overview from last school year. You can see that we've earned a total of 86.5% points. A piece to notice here is the 0 points for attendance, but we're going to get to that here in a second. But super proud of the success so far as we look at our academic achievement on track, target for math, on track for science, target for social studies, average for growth, and above average for growth in mathematics. So continuing to work through those above average for social studies and target for success ready. A huge bright point and spot to notice is the 100% graduation rate that we had last school year. So excited about that data. So based upon that data and our benchmarking assessments with our NWEA's tests, we have come up with the following growth targets for this coming school year. So you can see out to the right-hand side, the 30% is where we started baseline. The 60% is what we are targeting and what we're going for this school year for percent advanced and proficient in each of the different areas. So you can see Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, Reading and Language. You will notice that we do have 5 tests at the high school level, which is different from some of the other schools. We also have very content-specific tests when we talk about math. So we'll see some very specific growth in those areas, and we'll talk about the strengths with that. But then we'll also discuss the challenges that has with K through 12 assessments for reading and language over time. So those are our goals. And now you can see the achievement so far. And these are going to consistently kind of change. We pulled our testing window closes actually tomorrow. So we pulled a little bit. I waited as long as I could. So we're missing a little bit here. So it's going to adjust a little, mostly in the language and reading. We've had some students out with flu and teachers out with flu. So we're getting caught up on and back on track on that. But you can see overall, the percent of students scoring advanced and proficient. So when I say at benchmark throughout the presentation, and when I say advanced and proficient, those are the same thing. So we're looking for that at benchmark score, which means that they're at grade level or above. So percent of students scoring advanced and proficient for winter. What I thought was a great spot to notice was the percent of students meeting their growth target for winter of 2023. So the NWEA assessment gives students, you heard Mr. Zitzer talk previously about this, so I won't go into much, but between a 1 to 4 point growth. And if you really look at that, this strength in Algebra 2, that 91% of our students all met and grew and met their growth target, which I think is phenomenal. 88% in Geometry, 63 in Algebra 1. So we're seeing that growth over time, which brings me to at least the second bullet, the percent of students growing at least 1 point or more from fall to winter. So 61% in language, 58% in reading, 80% in algebra, 97.7 in Algebra 2, 96% in geometry. So really, really super that our kids are meeting those growth targets as outlined by NWEA. I will also say another strength would be that we started our baseline at 50% of our students scoring at benchmark for reading and language. So that is a significant jump. And we have actually another huge strength when we talk about systems and processes and how students are seeing growth and how we're making growth happen. We've actually formalized our MTSS intervention teams, which we call them our student success teams here for each grade level. And they meet bi-weekly, and we talk about student success. We talk about student attendance. We talk about behavior. We talk about all different layers and work together as a team to try to make sure that all students can meet their goals. But with those strengths and with looking at some of that data, there's always opportunities. And so when we look at our achievement, this is no different than what we've heard across the board. The gap still exists for our students of color, for our students with IEPs, and for our students who are receiving free reduced lunch. One of the things that we're digging into as well is this is only our second year with NWEA assessments, right? So we are learning more and more about the assessment every time we give it, and every time that we get data from it, we're learning a little bit more how to use it and how to really dig in as a PLC to set some meaningful goals and to have students set those goals. And you'll see that I mentioned PLC light versus PLC right. So one of the things that we talk about is a PLC answers those 4 core questions, right? And as we were asking, I think Mr. Miller was asking Ms. Elam earlier about, how do you know that, how are you progress monitoring? How are you going to know you're only giving 2 assessments? And so really digging in to those 4 core questions, like what do we want students to know? How are we going to know if they know it or not? What are we going to do if they don't get it? And what are we going to do if they do? So really digging into those 4 core questions and not just saying and checking off a box saying we got together and met. But then also one of the things that we've got to really start looking into more is classroom level interventions. So we do have some really good, strong interventions that are occurring, but they're outside of actual classroom time. So how do we start to build some of those pieces into the classroom level? And then also when we talk about high school students and we talk about the number of assessments that they have to take, one of the things we really need to be mindful of is the idea that a reading assessment is long, and it takes a very long time oftentimes, and it's a big, long passage. And the further you get in the assessment is the longer the passage becomes, the more complex the questions get. And sometimes kids are just tired of taking assessments. students. So we've paid close attention to the number of minutes that students are spending on the assessment. So looking at how long have they spent on this assessment? Is this truly a good reflection of what they know and can be able to do? And then having those conversations with students. One of the things we did see is we had some teachers that put some incentives in place this year just to test it out to see on the second round. And we saw more growth in the classrooms of teachers who put incentives in place, like tangible pieces for students if they grew. And it was just as simple as we're trying to get into the growth mindset. We just want to see your growth. We want to see what you know and are able to do. And then finally, we've talked about this. You heard them talk about, Ms. Elam talk about this as well, but setting goals. Like there's an opportunity for us like to really utilize our academic labs to set some strategic goals with students around their NWEA assessment and also helping kids understand how that translates into a classroom. So oftentimes we don't know. So I'm just taking a test to take a test. Well, what are we doing with this? So being very transparent as a staff to be able to share what we're going to be doing. And that's where our action steps come in next time. So using these student success teams, these biweekly teams and our PLCs, which meet biweekly, we actually this year identified students at the beginning of the year. So we took all of our data and we looked at students that were really close to meeting that at benchmark. And I know that I shared earlier that was the growth, projected growth was 1 to 4. We took it all the way down to we need these students to make 23, 24 point growth. And we've really, really worked intentional to make sure that we were able to put these things in place. We've created a system-wide approach about achievement and NWEA assessment, so being more intentional about giving that. And then the use of academic labs. So we've been really intentional with our academic lab this year. At semester, we made some adjustments to some of our math interventions. We also made adjustments to our academic labs as well and placed students into academic labs with teachers that they needed to work with more and have more class time with one-on-one. And we also began implementing a tutoring and mentoring program. So our NHS students had pushed into freshman level academic labs who needed some additional support. We also just this recently had other juniors and seniors sign up who also want to be tutors and are providing individual tutoring to students and mentoring as needed. We've made some strategic schedule adjustments to our schedule, making sure of timing of classes, placement of students. We even took some of our classes that we knew were co-taught classes in algebra, and we broke it up into 2 different classes so we could spread out the students a little more and made 2 sections. So that way we had a fewer number of students within each of those sections. But then in addition, just some professional learning for staff. What is engagement? What is academic monitoring? What does that look like? What does that look like for each of our core subjects? I know that we don't have, you saw social studies and science are also part of our AYP and APRs. So I know that I didn't talk much about setting a goal for that because we don't have the benchmarking piece there yet, but we are still being very intentional with our social studies and science and within our classrooms of looking at engagement, inquiry models of learning, and really digging into vocabulary for social studies. So the teachers have wrapped their AGMs around that using our PLCs and our MTSS models. So these are all action steps that we're going to continue to foster and grow. And then after we do our academic side and our achievement side, we look at our attendance. So this is, I'm really excited about this to share with you all. So this is by the conclusion of the year, we were trying to, I know this sounds really big and it is big, I will tell you that, but the lift is there for sure. But we're trying to go from a 71.2% to an 85% 90-90 attendance. And if you look at this slide here, you can see over the last several years where we were, we haven't even been out of 75% of our students being here in 90-90. And I am so happy to share with you that currently right now, as of December, we hit an 80.3% of our students have been here 90% of the time. So we have been working really hard to do that. And you can see our data down here for on target, watch, action, high risk, and can't meet. And yes, we do know who each of our students are. And so what we know about our attendance and our strengths is that we have put some very intentional monitoring, tracking, and engagement pieces in place. If you're a family and you see my emails, every week I'm emailing about our attendance. We have our dashboards, but not only that, but we meet weekly in attendance team meetings. So the counselor, principals, assistant principals, we're all sitting down at the table together and we're talking about student attendance. We know stories, we know what's going on. And I'll tell you right now that our biggest, I would say, opportunity for growth is the mental health layer. So a lot of our students, we're seeing a lot of mental health reasons for school refusal or avoidance of school in general. So that's real. But on track right now, we are on track to earn 2 points, and which is a 9% increase currently from last school year. I will also tell you that we cleaned up our attendance. Thank you to our attendance team. So what we found is that we have a bridge period. So our bridge period is first hour. So when attendance is taken first hour, that reports our 90/90 for the full day. So if a student comes late and does not check into the office and just reports the second hour or goes to class and hasn't checked in, the teacher's assuming that the student checked in and there's no adjustment in attendance, well, then that was getting marked absent for the whole, that student would have been marked absent for the whole day. So we've done a lot of attendance cleanup. We've even kind of gone back into the basics of you will check into the office and get a pink pass that you take to class. And we've just been really transparent with students. Like we're watching our attendance. We are watching if you are not coming to class and you're late, there's going to be some consequences. Like we've got to get here, we've got to learn. And so we've been really intentional about that. And so that's our opportunities. I would say overall, some of the things that we can do better with and that we're going to continue to work on is relationship building. So when a student arrives to school, instead of saying things like, "Where have you been?" "We're glad to see you. I'm glad you're here." You know, that type of relationship. And just a reminder that this is our school. We're glad you're here. We'll work on the other piece, but we're glad you're here. Let's get to learning. Implementing a tiered system of incentives. So our social worker has been working extensively with students who are struggling with attendance and coming to school and families, and they have made some attendance tracking charts, and we have spent a lot of time and effort and money with her working with students to figure out what are these incentives that students want, from Fanta orange soda to Hello Kitty stickers to whatever. If they're here, and we start small, come 3 days or 2 days in a row, and then you get your incentive. So we've been doing some of these things and we're seeing that show some huge success. So how do we build that out school-wide? And then communication with parents and guardians. So making sure that we're showing our parents and guardians, whether it's at parent-teacher conferences, whether it's every quarter when we send report cards, but how do our parents know where our students currently are? Are they approaching? Are they on track? Are they a target? Are they at risk? Are they action? What does that mean and what does that look like? And then being proactive, starting from the beginning with all of this, so we're not running around trying to chase it all, but we have a system in place that we can catch up and make sure that we're starting out of the gate. So again, narrowing our focus, increasing that communication. One of the things that we started talking about and leveraging with our Principal Advisory Leadership Board was student voice. How do we create a focus group around attendance to find out why students aren't coming to school? How do we partner with our alternative programs? They have an amazing community feel and relationship building layer that they implement. So what are some things that we can do that they are currently doing that we might be able to mirror to build and strengthen some of those relationships? And then always continue to refine our system. And then our final goal is wrapped around climate and culture. And we're looking at specifically the climate and culture survey data. We adjusted this a little bit once we actually had our climate and culture survey data. But really our areas of focus are increasing student voice, increasing parent involvement, and celebration and recognition. And on these next two slides, you'll see some of those areas. With our climate and culture, important to note that we had 65% of our students take the survey. So there's still some voices that we still need to leverage and that we still need to really hear. And we've been working with our Principal Advisory Leadership Board to try to figure out how do we do that. And I'll share some of the action steps we've already done and one we actually did today. And the next slide is our family results. So all of those target areas and those scores came from these two layers. So our strengths in climate and culture is that we do have a Principal Advisory Leadership Board going into the school year. We've established that. We've been working very closely. We've met over, I'm going to say 23 times now, had 23 meetings. We've pushed out into other buildings and other schools. I would say that parent engagement opportunities, we have some different ones that we haven't offered before. So if you're looking at our FAFSA Frenzy for senior parents, if you're looking at inviting parents out to the booster club meetings, or even having as simple as a parent meeting at the concession stand one night, like those are the things we've been doing to try to engage more parents. And then I'll say student voice, surveys, we like surveys. So lots of surveys go out. Committees with student voice, and then community events. So the different pieces we're offering in regards to that and the different events that we offer. Opportunities. So I shared earlier that we had 65% of students take that survey. I also recently sent on another parent-teacher conference survey. I had 10 parents answer that survey. So how do we continue to leverage voice and get students and parents involved? We're wanting to hear and we're wanting to make decisions with everyone. So how do we continue to leverage and build those opportunities in? The disproportionality gap. So when we talk about climate and culture, this comes specifically into play with discipline. So what's the percentage of our students in our areas, our students of color, our students with IEPs, our students for reduced lunch? What's the disproportionate rate of which they are being suspended or sent home from classes or not involved in classes to their peers? We've got to increase our modes and models of communication. I've got to figure out what people are reading, and I've got to cater to that. I've got to figure out how we get that message out there more. Identify an SEL curriculum. So this is an interesting layer and an interesting piece that I think we need to really start to explore, and we have started to explore what that might and could potentially look like for us during academic lab time. And then student engagement with survey. How do we get more kids to take the survey? I mean, that's the bottom line. But some of our action steps already. So partnering with our alternative programs. So really working with Ms. Foose and her team to really hear, she was sharing a lot more about discipline, a lot more about CBTE, competency-based teaching, what that might look like when it comes to teaching the skills and how do we get out into the world to learn our skills and what kind of expeditions can we take to see this metaphor come alive for us. Refining our PAL board. So as I shared earlier, we've spent a lot of time pushing out to some of our other buildings, but we've realized we haven't taken the time to get to hear our own voice, right? We know our voice at the table, but how do we leverage voice outside the table? And one of the things today that we did is we met with all of the club and activity leaders for their respective student groups. So we invited them all to the table. We went up to the new PDL room and we sat down and we dug into the questions together. We dug into how do you want to be celebrated? You saw that was one of the pieces that our data was lowest on. We asked students, how do you want to be celebrated? What does that look like? And are going to continue to dig into it. We realized that an hour wasn't enough time. And we just sat and we listened and we talked, which I think sometimes is even more powerful than a survey, right? So just hearing that voice. Creating a focus group of parents and staff, coming together wrapped around climate and culture, like where do we want to go? What is this going to look like? And sitting down and making sure that we're inviting and engaging everyone. And how do we do that? Through personal invitation. If I've got to go knock on some doors, that's what I'm going to do to make sure that we're all coming to the table and able to do some of these things together. But then also programming. So we've added a bunch of new layers this year and opportunities for kids. A bright spot is that 47% of our students here at MRH High are involved in a club or activity. That's good. It could be better. You know, we definitely obviously want 100%, but 47% is a large number. And that's not counting students that are involved in multiple, because we all know that we've got students that are involved in multiple. So out of our total student population, we've got 47% involved in at least one sports club or activity. But then also adding in the new sports that students were asking for and listening to that voice. So I think over time, as we start to listen to voice, I think that we're going to start to see that change in our survey. And then as we continue to meet and continue to let the voices trickle out and share out in our town halls, we've been having our town halls, and our Principal Advisory Leadership Board has been going up there and sharing updates, as well as Student Council. So continuing those pieces that we know are good culture and climate pieces for student voice. Questions?
I have a question. So, in part of, you're, kind of got your ear to the ground. Are the kids telling you that they feel prepared to move on, or do the kids just sort of float through the halls thinking like, what am I doing? Do they see like they have goals and that they understand that what they're learning can help them achieve their goals?
You know, what's really funny is that's our focus for this month. So we're getting ready to send out a school-wide survey so our Principal Advisory Leadership Board, we came together and it's actually all wrapped around goals. So do you have goals? Do you set goals? Literally those questions are coming out this week. Katie, I think, is sending it out tomorrow with the announcements. So yes. So do I think that I think it depends upon what level. So what I've noticed in the culture and climate survey is that when we talk about desegregating the data, I know Ms. Martinez asked about that earlier. When we talk about desegregating that out, what I'm seeing, where I'm seeing discrepancies in some of the data is by grade level. So like as we dig into grade level of like 9th and 10th grade, by 12th grade, there's a difference in the classroom. So like one of the questions was, my teachers can teach without interruption. something around that. So with that one, you see your 12th graders across the board are saying, oh yes, that's totally, my classroom's fine. But where you see freshmen saying, oh no, there's some issues here. So it's an interesting layer as I'm looking at that. To me, where I'm seeing those discrepancies is through the grade levels, which brings us back to when the PAL board, I believe we raised the idea of transition is a tough time for kids. And I know Mr. Zitzer was talking about students think that they're ready for high school, but I'll be honest, what we're seeing is that students as freshmen struggle. And part of it is the added layer of rigor, the added layer of expectation. High school looks different. And so how do we really truly prepare our students for that? And that's where we're going to start and continue to leverage our PAL board and work real closely with that middle school PAL board to try to see, what that should look like. And Mr. Zitzer and I work together all the time. And Dr. Maxwell has a nice piece right now where he's kind of between both buildings. So he's able to see our 8th graders coming up, and we're able to have those strong conversations of what does this class need? What supports do they need, and what might that look like? And that's where I think that SEL curriculum can come into play, because I would say overall what we're seeing is kids are either prepared or they're really struggling. So, and the struggling would be under those SEL layers. So do they have the organizational skills? Do they have study skills? And how do we help teach our kids those traits and those habits?
Thank you, Mrs. Huffman. Thank you to all of our building leaders for showing us the celebrations and the areas of growth. We really appreciate that. If we continue to have questions, we can absolutely email them through Dr. Jameson and get some more answers to those questions. I'd like to move on. If there's no further questions or anything like that, we're going to move on to item 4.02, the strategic plan committees. Dr. Jameson. While Dr. Jameson is getting set up, I would just like to remind our community about our strategic plan committees. And how they are just a really great intersection of, we ask for student voice, we ask for teacher voice, we ask for admin voice, and our community committees are where a really great place for our community members to enter and make sure their voice is heard.
Thank you. So I wanted to bring back to the board the process for identifying individuals to indicate their interest in our committees. I need to switch out my computer. So I know this is fairly small. Just to kind of give a recap, the application went out, it was completed electronically, and we had participants to select their first and second choice. And as you can see from the color coding that is included here, is that some of the varying committees had more interest than others. And so I just wanted to open it up to the board. You had an opportunity to review individuals who have indicated they're interested. Both cities have actually pushed the application out in their communication. So we have seen additional individuals indicate an interest. And so I will share that information at our next executive check-in, but wanted to see if the board was open with moving forward with the current individuals who indicated that they had interest, and then for me and my team to make adjustments based on equaling out the individuals across the varying committees. So what you can see here is that you have more people interested in for our community, more interested in for our resources, not a lot of interest. Computer's not scrolling. Not a lot of interest in for our students, which is the academic piece. So my goal, once the board indicates that the individuals who have identified an interest, we will make those adjustments so that each of the varying committees are as equal as possible based on the interest and expertise of those individuals who have signed up. So wanted to open it up to the board with questions, thoughts, so that we can get our first meeting scheduled.
Yeah, I want to reiterate that this is a new thing for us, and so this is a bit of an experiment. I appreciated the information with both first and second choices, and I think using that, we can probably, I would be inclined to accept the applications of all of these folks who have applied. I think pretty much everybody could get their first choice. Let's see, I did do my own little tallying, and there were, to even it out, that one or two people maybe would be put on their second choice committee. But I think we obviously also said that this isn't the closing of the staffing of this committee too. So I think as we live into it, if we give somebody their second choice and it ends up not being a comfortable fit for them, then as we add some additional people, maybe we can scoot folks around too. I know we could take a really long time deciding on this, or but we should give it the appropriate amount of consideration.
Well, and just a reminder that this will start, but it's still fluid. So if people are still interested in our community, they should still continue to submit those applications. Dr. Jameson, just remind the community, well, how long is the service? Is it a year long? Is it?
So because of the time frame for getting a pool of individuals interested in serving, the hope is to have this committee to run throughout the year, so that when we start, we have continuity of individuals. So we'll have a meeting before the end of the school year, which is really exciting because we'll have data to share, because now the academic data is not embargoed, in addition to the work that the management oversight teams are doing to bring this information back to the varying committees. So those individuals will remain on through next year. And then as we continue to get new individuals who are interested, they will then be again brought to the board for consideration, same process. And then we would fill for the committees based on the interests that are or have been identified. So I feel pretty good about starting. Like I said, we should be able to get at least 4 individuals into each committee with some adjustments, in addition to having the board members on and then the central office staff members who will actually support in this work. And so just to remind community, the board will work, those board individuals who are assigned to committees will work in conjunction with the central office staff member. So the communication and all of those things will be pushed out by the central office staff member, but the part of the leadership is from the board and the board's committee. So that will be also including the development of agendas and things like that as those meetings begin to get off the ground. And I do want to mention that these particular meetings we set to be quarterly. So that's why it's important for us to get these committees formed so that we can have a meeting prior to the end of the school year. Other questions?
So how do other board members feel okay about approving all of these individuals who have applied at this point? See some shaking heads. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I guess the question is, I think we had 6 or 7 folks who prioritized for our health, and then 2 or 3 in each of the other categories. Do we want to let everybody have their first choice, or do we want at this point to shuffle some folks around? I was gonna maybe recommend that Jessica Woodruff be put on for our students. Emma Stable Smith be put on for our community, and Victoria Schnoes be put on for our resources, and that would give them their second choice and even things out a little bit across community members. But that was just based on a little bit of what I gleaned from their applications.
Katie, can you give me the second one again?
I'll send you my list here since
I think if we can even it out, I definitely would like every committee to be balanced. I'd like to honor the community members and their choices, but that's why there is a first and a second choice. So, if Dr. Jameson and your team have come up with a good way to balance that out and everybody gets one of their two choices, let's get it going.
Sounds fantastic. Any other thoughts before I close this one out? Right.
All right. Moving on to item 4.03, board policies HA and HH. Dr. J? Excuse me, Dr. Jameson.
Oh, I love the affectionate term. So these two policies are actually coming back. And just to transparency for community, the rationale for bringing these policies back sooner is to ensure that the changes in regards to the timeline for negotiations and when the information needed to be completed. What you will find in the change in the policies, and I'll pull this up here. There we go. There weren't many significant changes. So the two policies that were actually brought forward as far as the language and some of the questions that were actually asked or had. And so the majority of the transition and the language had already been completed prior to coming back to the board. And we did make the adjustments based on what was there. So the main differences, and computer's running a little bit slow, so my apologies. Wonderful MSBA policies gives you lots of context before you get to the actual policies. It doesn't want to work. It's okay. There we go. All right. So in looking at the language, again, just a reminder, anything that is in red is actually a strike through that's being removed. Anything in blue is actually new language. So there weren't any recommended changes from the board in regards to the actual changes in policy. And then you can see as far as the district negotiation team, all of that language is the same as when it was brought back before. There was some conversation about changing the date for May 15th. We feel like we can keep the negotiation schedule as outlined and still have the ability to get contracts out, hence the moving of these policies to February, which would allow the association to have their election to begin to have conversations around negotiations. So again, no changes for this particular policy. Welcome to answer any questions that the board may have.
So to reiterate, especially since we had public comment at our January board meeting requesting that we make an exception to the timeline presented in this policy, the board is voting on a policy that would not adjust the timeline for this year. Primarily, my consideration on that, and I believe we discussed this, is we have to ensure that we are able to get contracts out to ensure we have a teaching staff to start the upcoming school year, and delaying the negotiation end date as requested would put us in jeopardy of being able to get contracts out in a timely manner. And so this is, while not what was requested by the teaching core, it is a decision made with the best interest of the district's well-being in mind.
Katie, I will say that the flexibility, because typically, just to remind community that we don't typically bring policies to work sessions, so the board is making an exception to have these policies to come to the work session so that the election can occur and given more time once everything is completed. So I do think that the board is being quite considerate and meeting in the middle while also keeping the initial timeline that's included in the policy. I'll close this one out and go to the next one. The hard part when you're using one screen, so bear with me. And so for policy HH, if you can recall, there really wasn't any feedback that we received from the association, so there weren't any changes for that one. And so again, it's just coming forward unless the board has additional questions. Wants to load. And so while the group, and just as a reminder, part of the conversation that was had at the last board meeting was who was included in the group. And so while policy HH does not specifically, technology works when it wants to work. But while this particular policy does not outline who's in the group, when we look at the next board item, which is the ballot, it clearly defines who's in the group. But I did want to note that it is general hearsay or group of teachers when we're talking about initial recognition, but part of that also includes who's going to be included in the group again, which is outlined in the ballot. And that information has been shared with the association. They are aware of who's been included. And we'll talk about that when we get to the ballot. But there were really no other changes suggested or recommended with this. And again, this is the second time the board is having an opportunity to view this particular policy.
Anybody have any questions or comments for Dr. Jameson? Okay. Then we'd move on to item 4.04, the MRH NEA election ballot.
So this is the item that probably got most of our public comments during our last board meeting while this one loads. And it was more specific to who was actually defined in the group. And so with this particular piece, and typically what you find, depending on what district you're referencing, you have some who actually include anyone that's on the teacher scale. There's also language around individuals who have like jobs. So for example, counselors are on the teacher pay scale, social workers on the teacher pay scale, as well as nurses, but the functions of those roles are very different. And so through consultation with legal counsel and additional conversation with the board, we did make the recommendation here for the ballot for the group to actually include all teachers who are certified, which would include librarians, SEL teachers, and things of that nature, counselors, and social workers. And just to highlight the communication that we did get from the association, they wanted to be sure or certain that counselors were included. And so what the ask was to call out specifically counselors because they weren't included, but based on the way that the language is written, it really isn't required because they are considered to be a part of the teaching core and also on the pay schedule. So that's the only item that I want to share with the board, that the ask came from the association, but as it's written and as has been communicated, counselors and social workers are all included in this definition of the bargaining group. Are there any questions from the board?
Would you review, Dr. Jameson? So this will be an action step for us tonight, both of these. And then what's the next step?
So what would happen, the association will be notified. We did work with them because it's their responsibility to set up their election. So in our last meeting, we talked about identifying a person, a time to make that happen. So I think we're in a good place for that. And they have actually reached out to the League of Women to facilitate their election. And with this actually coming to the board sooner in the time frame that's needed, once the board approves this, they can actually have their election as long as it's I think 10 days after the board approves it. So they are already working with the League of Women to schedule that. They have a location identified, and then we will begin to meet to discuss the articles, and Cindy will assist us with identifying what that is. And so there's some core things that we need to put at the forefront of that, which also includes, like, for example, when you look at the policy, when negotiations are to take place, they will not take place if they're going to create a challenge or stress on the school system and also impact instruction on a daily basis. So it will typically occur after school, and we will discuss placing limits on the amount of time. So I've been in places where negotiations have gone to midnight and 1 a.m. So we do want people to be well rested and being able to come back and serve our children. So we want to ensure that we have some parameters in place to ensure that we're getting the work well, by also respecting the self-care of the people who have to still serve and show up. So I feel pretty good about where we are. I think the district and the association have attempted to work collaboratively to try to get here. The hope is that we will continue to have the same level of collaboration as we enter into negotiations.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? If not, we move on to action items.
I think I led you astray earlier that we didn't actually vote on the consent agenda, and you were right that we should have. So we can do that now.
All right, we're going to circle back around. Back up to item 2, consent agenda. May I please get a motion?
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Yes.
Any opposed? Okay. Then we will move on to item 5. 5.01, Board Policy HA and HH. May I get a motion?
I move to adopt policies HA and HH as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, then it's approved. Item 5.02, MRH NEA election ballot. May I get a motion?
Move to approve the election ballot as presented.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nope. Then it passes. 5.03, executive session. May I have a motion?
I move to enter executive session in accordance with section 610.021, subsections 3, 9, and 13, and section 610.022 of the revised statutes of Missouri on February 1st, 2024 for the following specific reasons: personnel matters.
We're going to do a roll call. Joshua Miller,
Yes.
Christy Martinez,
Yes.
Julie Francois,
Yes.
Linda Robinson,
Yes.
Katie Kaufman,
Yes.
Rachel Goldsman, yes. We will adjourn at 8:49, and the link to executive session is in the agenda. I'll see you in a few minutes.